remember that night like it happened just a moment ago. The air felt still, unnervingly quiet, like the world was holding its breath. My phone buzzed once, a message, a notification, nothing unusual. But when I opened it, everything I thought I knew shattered in an instant. It's strange how betrayal doesn't make a sound. It doesn't crash or scream. It just appears in a message, a glance, a half smile that suddenly feels foreign. And that night, I saw something I was never supposed to see for months. I'd felt at the distance, the little lies wrapped in kindness. He'd been coming home late, his phone always turned face down, his laughter quieter, forced. I told myself I was imagining it. I told myself love could fix it. But deep down, I knew. So I watched. Not because I wanted to catch him, but because I needed to know the truth even if it broke me. And when the truth finally appeared on that screen, it didn't just break me, it changed me. The photo wasn't blurry. It wasn't vague. It was him, his hand, his smile, his eyes, all the things I knew by heart. But they weren't looking at me. For a few seconds, I couldn't breathe. I stared at the screen, frozen, my fingers trembling. Every memory, every promise, every night we'd spent talking until dawn, it all collapsed into silence. He thought I'd never find out. He thought he was too careful. But what he didn't know is that I was already watching. That was the moment something inside me shifted, the moment love turned into clarity, and clarity turned into fire. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just stared at the truth until it burned itself into my heart. That's how it all began, not with a fight, not with a goodbye, but with quiet, deliberate realization. I wasn't the woman who waited anymore. I was a woman who watched. And from that night on, everything changed. The next morning felt colder than usual, even though the sun was out. I stood by the kitchen window, watching him make coffee like it was any other day. He smiled, that same gentle, familiar smile, the one I used to trust without question. But now, every word, every move, felt rehearsed. He asked if I slept well. I nodded. I lied. It's strange once you've seen the truth. Pretending becomes its own kind of punishment. Every small gesture becomes evidence. Every silence feels like a confession. That week, I began noticing the cracks I had ignored for so long. His shirt smelled like perfume that wasn't mine. His phone buzzed with messages he'd swipe away too quickly. He laughed more at his screen than he did at anything I said, and yet he played his role perfectly. To anyone else, we were fine, the picture of stability. Dinner together, polite smiles at friends' gatherings, photos that made us look happy. But behind every picture was a story I couldn't unsee. Night, I'd lie awake beside him, staring at the ceiling, listening to the rhythm of his breathing, wondering how many times he'd fallen asleep next to me after spending his day with someone else, wondering if she knew about me, wondering if either of us really knew him at all. He used to tell me I was his piece. Now I realized I had become his cover. I remember the day I started keeping my distance, not emotionally, but strategically. I stopped asking questions. I stopped reacting. I gave him what he wanted most, comfort in his illusion. He thought I was still the same trusting woman he could manipulate. But in truth, I was collecting moments, watching patterns, memorizing his lies. Sometimes, silence is louder than confrontation. He didn't realize it, but my silence was the start of my plan. The more I watched, the more his patterns revealed themselves. The phone calls taken in the car, the late work meetings, the sudden interest in his appearance. The days he'd come home lighter, humming, as if the world was finally in tune for him, and then the days he'd return quiet, restless, avoiding my eyes. That's when I knew there was trouble between them. Whoever she was, their secret wasn't as stable as he thought. And that instability would soon become my opportunity. You learn a lot by pretending not to know. It gives people a false sense of control. It lets them reveal themselves piece by piece until they're standing in their own trap. I wasn't ready to confront him, not yet. Confrontation gives closure, but exposure gives truth. And I wanted him to feel what I had felt. Disbelief, confusion, loss of ground. So I smiled when he left the house. I kissed his cheek when he said he'd be working late. I whispered I love you like it was still true. But inside, I was writing a story of my own, a story that would end the moment he least expected it. They say revenge is about anger, but that's not true. It's about control. And for the first time in months, I had it back. As I watched him walk out the door that evening, his suit perfectly pressed, his charm carefully intact, I whispered to myself, keep pretending, because soon, pretending would be all he had left. It's unsettling, watching someone you love slowly turn into a stranger. At first, you tell yourself you're imagining things, that love couldn't just vanish without a trace. But soon, the truth becomes undeniable. The way he looked at me changed. His eyes weren't warm anymore. They were distracted, like he was here, but already somewhere else. Days became a routine of silence and excuses. We'd sit across from each other at dinner, forks scraping against plates, filling the space that used to be laughter. I'd ask how his day was, and he'd give me short, practiced answers. He stopped asking about mine entirely. It was like he'd run out of interest in the person he once swore he couldn't live without. One night, while folding laundry, I noticed a receipt tucked inside his jacket pocket. A restaurant I'd never been to, 2 meals, 1 bottle of wine. The date was from 2 nights earlier. He told me he was working late. I stared at the paper for a long time, my hands trembling. It was such a small thing, but it confirmed everything. I remember laughing quietly to myself, not out of amusement, but disbelief. How simple it was, how stupidly obvious, and how blind I'd been. That night, I didn't cry. I just watched him as he came home, late again, smelling faintly of expensive perfume and guilt. He smiled when he saw me, that fake, mechanical smile that once melted me. I smiled back, almost too easily, because in that moment, I knew something had shifted inside me. The version of me that used to beg for answers, to make sense of things, she was gone. The woman standing in that room had no interest in explanations. She wanted the truth. Yes, but not through his words, through his actions, through evidence. The next morning, I followed him. Not in a movie-style way, no sunglasses or hiding in alleys. I just happened to run an errand near his office. I waited in the car for 2 hours, sipping coffee gone cold. Then I saw him walk out, dressed a little too sharply for an office lunch, glancing around like a man who didn't want to be seen. And then I saw her. She was younger, pretty, in a polished way. The kind of woman who'd never know the quiet exhaustion that comes from holding a relationship together by yourself. She laughed when he spoke. He touched her hand across the table, and I felt something inside me freeze. But the strange thing was I didn't feel jealous. I felt free. Because once you see the truth with your own eyes, the illusion can't hurt you anymore. It can only prepare you. For the first time in months, I felt clarity. It wasn't about saving us anymore. It was about ending it right. As I drove home, I played every moment in my mind like scenes in a movie. The nights he came home exhausted, the weekends he claimed to work overtime, the sudden absences, the secrecy, the defensiveness. All of it pieces of a puzzle I had finally solved. He wasn't just lying to me. He was building a world where I didn't exist. And now, I would build one where he didn't. That night, when he got home, I didn't mention a word. I made dinner. I laughed at his small talk. I acted exactly like the woman he thought he'd fooled. Because the moment he saw through my calm, my plan would crumble. As he kissed me goodnight and turned away to sleep, I stared at the ceiling and whispered to myself, "You made me a stranger in my own life. But soon, I'll be the one you never saw coming." It wasn't anger that filled me, it was precision. Every lie he told became a thread I'd pull, one by one, until everything he'd built came undone. He didn't know it yet, but his story was no longer his to tell. It was mine now, and I was just getting started. There's a moment in every betrayal when the truth stops hiding. It doesn't whisper anymore, it screams. That night, it came to me not in words, but in the sound of his phone vibrating on the kitchen counter. I was cooking dinner when it buzzed. Once, twice, 3 times. I called out to him, no answer. He was in the shower. I shouldn't have looked. I told myself that, but my hands moved before my mind caught up. The screen lit up again, her name flashing bold and bright, followed by a heart. Every part of me froze. The air felt heavier. My chest tightened. I'd prepared myself for this moment, but seeing her name made it real. I opened the message. "I miss you already," it said. Another followed. Last night felt perfect. My hands shook as I scrolled, reading words no one should ever have to read. Words that erased every memory, every promise, every "I love you" that had ever passed between us. It was all there. Their dates, their jokes, their stolen weekends, and me unknowingly waiting at home, holding onto a lie. I heard the water stop. My heart raced, but my mind was clear. I put the phone back exactly where it was, wiped my hands on the towel, and took a slow, steady breath. He came out of the bathroom humming, towel around his neck, looking so normal, so ordinary. "Smells good," he said, walking past me to check the food, and in that instant, I saw him for what he truly was, not a partner. Not even an enemy, just a man too weak to face what he'd broken. Dinner was quiet that night. I watched him talk about work, laugh about some joke from his office, and all I could think was, "You're lying with every breath you take." But I didn't say a word. Not yet. After dinner, he sat beside me on the couch, scrolling through his phone like nothing had changed. The same phone I now knew everything about. The same device that held the proof of his double life. He looked at me and smiled, that easy, practiced smile that used to melt me. I smiled back, because for the first time, I wasn't the one being fooled. That night, when he fell asleep beside me, I lay there in the dark, watching him breathe. His face looked peaceful. Mine burned with quiet fury, I could have confronted him, then screamed, cried, demanded an explanation. But what would that give me? His apologies? His excuses? His lies repackaged as regret? No, I wanted more than that. I wanted him to feel what I felt, the shock, the helplessness, the crumbling of something you thought was unbreakable. So I decided. That night, in the silence of our bedroom, I made my plan. The next morning, I was calm. Too calm. I made his breakfast, wished him a good day, and watched him walk out the door with his usual confidence. If he looked closely, he might have noticed something different in my eyes, not sadness, not anger, but purpose. That's the thing about betrayal. It doesn't destroy you right away. It builds something inside you, something sharp, patient, unstoppable. As he left, his car disappearing down the street, I whispered to myself, you've built your world on lies. Let's see how long it stands when truth knocks on your door. Because I wasn't his victim anymore. I was his mirror. And soon, he'd be staring at every piece of himself he tried to hide. For weeks after that night, my days blurred into the same quiet ritual. I would go to work, come home, make the bed again as if order could stitch up the hole he had left. I walked around our apartment like a careful thief, touching nothing out of spite but noticing everything out of necessity. The receipts, the small notes, the little things he left behind, each one a breadcrumb on a path he thought I'd never follow. At first it felt ridiculous, like something out of a movie. Me, keeping a folder on my laptop labeled evidence, screenshots tucked into folders, photos backed up in 3 different places. But the ridiculousness faded into purpose. Purpose is a strange kind of bomb. It steadied me. It kept my head clear when everything else wanted to spin. I stopped imagining scenes where we fought. I stopped waiting for confessions. I started collecting proof. There's an art to gathering truth when the person you love is hiding it. You have to be patient. You have to be precise. You have to be boring in the way you keep your life moving forward while quietly building the case no one will anticipate. I learned to be invisible in my own home. I learned the hours he checked his phone and the messages he deleted. I memorized the tone of his excuses and the timing of his late nights. I kept copies of every suspicious email and clipped the delivery slips he brushed off as work stuff. I screenshot conversations that hinted at meetups and saved calendar events he assumed I'd never see, but evidence by itself is blunt. It can anger you into a confrontation that ends with excuses and tears. I didn't want that. I wanted something sharper. I wanted something that would leave him with no space to rewrite the story or claim misunderstanding. I wanted him to look up one day and see that the life he had built on lies was actually, quietly, imploding around him, exposed not by rage, but by facts. So I planned the reveal like a scene in a play. First, the audience, his colleagues, the people who believed his story, the ones who praised him at drinks parties and texted him congratulations when he mentioned new projects. They were the ones who would have to witness the disconnect between his image and his actions. Second, the timing. It had to be when he was performing at his best, confident, composed, surrounded by those he liked to impress. There's nothing crueler than people you need for social proof realizing you've been lying to them. And that realization is the most effective kind of exposure I could imagine, and so the dinner became the stage. When he told me about it, how it was a big night, how many important people would be there, I felt my pulse steady instead of spike. My role would be simple and deliberate. Play the loving partner, the woman everyone expected him to have. Let him bask in the glow of his constructed life. Let him feel untouchable. Because a man who feels untouchable behaves differently under the bright light when his shadow is suddenly shown to everyone. I rehearsed what I would say, but more importantly, I rehearsed what I would not say. I practiced the expression of someone who has accepted the world's story because she doesn't need its approval anymore. Calmness is an underrated weapon. People assume the wrong react loudly. Fewer expect a measured silence that feels like a promise. Beyond the dinner, I darkened his mirrors, where he kept trophies of his status photos on the mantle. Small awards I made sure to have counterpoints ready. A printed photo from the restaurant. A folder with messages sorted by date. An email thread that tied bookings to the nights he said he was at the office. Even small things mattered. Receipts showing 2, not 1, dinners. Calendar entries with duplicate events. A taxi receipt that matched the time when he claimed to be on a call. You accumulate these things and suddenly the story tilts away from one version and toward the truth. I also thought about the aftermath. A reveal doesn't end at the point of exposure. It extends into the way people respond, the ways he would try to manage the fallout. That's where strategy matters most. If you give someone a chance to recover with a tear-streaked apology, their friends may forgive. If you expose them publicly and allow silence to do its work, their own supporters will fill the gap with speculation that corrodes credibility. I wanted the corrosion not for cruelty, but because the illusion needed to crack in places where it was strongest. So I planned my exit too. When the moment came, I would leave the room calmly, not as punishment but as a deliberate statement. I was not staying for the performance of apologies. I would let the rumor mill spin, let the conversations hush, let the looks gather around him. Later, I would take control of the narrative in quieter ways, texts to close friends, a steady refusal to participate in the damage control he might attempt. Silence, once again, would be my instrument. Not silence of fear, but silence of decision. Arming myself with truth felt almost clinical at times. There were evenings I sat in the dark and felt no warmth left for him. There were mornings I brewed coffee and placed 2 cups on the counter simply because our habits refused to die instantly. I let routine become the mask that hid the preparation. He never suspected. He assumed complacency where there was calculation. And yet, while I planned, life kept happening. Small, ordinary moments crept in: an old friend calling to check in, a neighbor bringing flowers after hearing something was wrong, the way the sunlight fell across our bed in the morning. Those ordinary things reminded me that my life was not just the set of a revenge plot. It was messy, beautiful, and still mine. That realization kept me balanced between fury and focus. There's a difference between wanting someone to suffer and wanting yourself to be whole. I aimed for the latter. I also practiced restraint because I knew anger could disguise itself as righteousness. I didn't want my plan to be about satisfying a bruised ego. I wanted it to be about truth. So when friends asked whether I planned to confront him, I smiled and said, maybe one day. Truthfully, I had no patience for theatrics. The theater I planned wasn't for drama, it was for clarity. There were tactical decisions too. I created backups, copies of evidence stored on cloud drives, printed folders sealed in envelopes for certain people in case I needed to distribute them quickly. I considered hiring a private investigator at one point, but the idea felt like an admission that I couldn't handle it myself. Pride can be a dangerous luxury, but I had found a steadier for self-reliance. And then, the most delicate part, timing. You don't expose someone when you're furious. You expose them when the reveal will land hardest and when the consequences will most closely match the betrayal. For him, that would be a night of applause. For me, it would be the moment where applause stops, where the conversation falters, where people's eyes find the discrepancy and don't look away. That silence is heavy. It lodges in a person's chest in a way apologies never can. In the days before the dinner, I rehearsed my face in the mirror. I practiced the coolness of someone who had nothing to prove. I chose a dress that said confidence without desperation. I rehearsed the way I would hold my phone nonchalant until the moment I wanted it to speak. I made sure my evidence was organized, labeled, and accessible in the blink of an eye. There was no room for hesitation. Once the curtain went up, the stage would belong to me. On the morning of the dinner, I woke earlier than usual. The city still had that hush to it, the kind of calm before something obvious happens. I made coffee, arranged flowers in a simple vase, and breathed. There was a strange sense of peace. It wasn't joy. It was the quiet center of someone who knew a difficult right from a simple wrong. When he left that afternoon kissing my cheek, telling me to have a good evening, I watched him walk away with the same steady steps he'd always had. He didn't know I had everything lined up. He didn't know that by nightfall the story he counted on would be unstitched in front of dozens of witnesses. He didn't know that his safety net was now a collection of documents, messages, and one decisive photograph. You learn something about people when you put them under pressure. Masks slip. The small lies swell into big ones, and the people who traffic in falsehoods begin to believe the stories they tell. My job wasn't to trap him in a lie for show. My job was to hand the truth to the people who had been misled, and in doing so, to hand myself back the life that had been quieted by his choices. That night, I sat at the table and let the performance play out. I smiled at the right moments. I laughed when a joke landed. I let him feel the applause for being who he pretended to be. But beneath that calm, the engine I'd built hummed with readiness. The stage was set, the audience in place, and the truth carefully compiled and impossible to dispute sat in my pocket like a small, dangerous weight. When the moment comes, you realize how ordinary power can feel. A steady breathing, a choice made, a finger pressing a screen. That ordinary power is often more devastating than rage. It's the kind that strips away pretense without needing to yell. It's clean. It's final. It's the kind of justice that leaves no doubt. And when I finally chose to reveal him not with a scream, not with a scene, but was quiet, unarguable proof, I knew I wasn't just ending his performance. I was reclaiming my life.